Clyde is getting really creeped out by her, so he pushes her down the stairs. Her leg breaks as she rolls down the steps before she lands at the bottom, instantly dying. The next day, Dr. Cornelia is visited by a strange man who claims to be the creature from Mary's story. Cornelia thinks it's a prank and makes him remove his hat and scarf, so she sees his monstrous face. A terrified Cornelia tries to run away, but Frank stops her when he points out that he's the one who has been writing to her for the past few months. Cornelia agrees to see him and shakes his hand before studying his body, which she's very impressed by. Frank explains he's been following Cornelia's work on reanimation, so he wants her to build him a bride. Their discussion is interrupted when the assistant Greta comes in and screams at the sight of Frank. After Greta leaves in fear, Frank explains how lonely he is, so Cornelia convinces him to stay in the institute to work things out. In the evening, Frank goes to the theater to watch a movie with his favorite actor Ronnie. He loves the romantic scenes, so he repeats the dialogue and sings along, even copying. In the lab, Cornelia starts getting all the machines ready while Frank admires the body, which turns out to be Ida. He starts having doubts because Ida is too beautiful for him and says they should do this tomorrow. At that moment Greta tries to look inside the lab, so Cornelia rushes to kick her out and locks the door. She then explains she can't have a body around the lab, so they must do this now or never. Once Ida is connected to the machines, Cornelia starts turning them on. Frank is so nervous that he gets an anxiety attack, so Cornelia helps him calm down and they pull the final lever together. Ida's body is filled with a special chemical compound as the machine's bulbs break because of the great amount of electricity used by the reanimation. A ball of energy enters the body and with a loud groan, she's finally alive again. Suddenly Ida starts coughing up the compound and Cornelia tells Frank that returns to the dance floor while Ida responds drinking at the table. Soon Ida manages to get a proper dance partner, however his dirty dancing soon turns into improper touching, and his friend joins him to touch her too. Ida realizes what's happening and pushes them off, but the men refuse to let go. Ida screams and says she isn't afraid of Lupino and her men, causing the guys to get violent. Frank immediately comes to her rescue and takes her away. Outside the club, the guys follow Ida and Frank, pushing them and mocking them while the couple tries to ignore them. They hit Frank and make him fall, taking the chance to pull Ida away from them. They try to take advantage of her again, so she bites a man's face and tries to run, but they make her fall too. A furious Frank grabs one of the men and continuously pounds his face on Ida still there. He tells her that an angry mob will come after him, which has already happened before, so she should go home. Ida doesn't know where her home even is, so she takes his hand and they run away together. In a new dream, Ida sees her head in a jar and feels like she can't breathe. Mary mocks her for not remembering her name but also tells her to find it. At that moment Frank wakes her up, revealing they've sneaked onto a moving train. Moments later the train stops and Frank hears the cops searching for them, so the couple quickly hides behind some boxes. While they wait, Frank shows Ida a newspaper article he kept because it's about Ronnie, but Ida is tired movies and drags him into a different theater, so the detective doesn't see them. While they try to watch the movie, Ida notices a couple in front of them getting dirty. The woman doesn't really want to do this in public, so Ida attacks the boyfriend and reminds him what consent is. The guy notices the couple's faces and calls them monsters, realizing they're the murderers from the news. The whole crowd panics, so Frank drags Ida out of the theater. When Jake and Myrna see people running in panic, they rush to investigate. The crowd chases after Ida and Frank, who turn around the corner only to find the way blocked by a police car. They enter a random building to escape and run through a kitchen before reaching a fancy party. The couple grabs some trays to pretend to be waiters while eating some of the food. Frank tries to sneak around carefully until he discovers that Ronnie is at the party too. He immediately approaches him and tells him he's a huge fan because around 20 years ago, Ronnie smiled at him and made him feel less alone. Frank says he's survived all this time, thanks to Ronnie. Ronnie tries to make a joke before going back. Ida explains he isn't the problem. She explains that Lupino has the police in his pocket and lists all the women he's killed. When someone tries to sneak out through the back door, Ida shoots at the wall to make them stop. As she talks against corruption and all the dead women that didn't get justice, an officer tries to approach Ida from behind. She's startled and shoots him down. Frank uses the distraction to bring down the chandelier, making it crash on the floor while the crowd panics. In the darkness, Frank and Ida can run away unnoticed. On the street, Ida feels bad about shooting a man. However, Frank is proud of her and explains this is what they have to do to survive. They start kissing and are interrupted by Jake, who doesn't dare to shoot Ida. The creatures laugh at him before running away. Later the cops find the abandoned building, but the creatures aren't there. They're hiding in a barn, where they finally get dirty. Afterward they steal a car and leave the city. Considering their last location, she theorizes they'll go to Niagara Falls next. At the same time, the creatures are indeed going to Niagara Falls and Frank tells Ida about the corresponding movie. When Ida asks about their engagement, Frank pretends they had a wonderful proposal and makes up a whole story. At that moment a police car starts following them. Ida stops the car and Frank covers his face with his scarf, so when the cop approaches them, Ida tells him that Frank is her sick uncle. Since she doesn't have her papers, the cop makes her step out and pats her down while touching her inappropriately and calling her slurs. When the officer comes too close and tries to take advantage of her, Frank shoots him through the window. Then Ida jumps on him and tries to rip his tongue off. A second cop comes out of his car and shoots Ida in the shoulder, so Frank kills him with a shot to the head. Then Ida bites the first officer's tongue to finish ripping it off and steals his car while Frank asks who James by running in, but Ida says she doesn't remember. In the morning, Myrna asks James about Ida and he breaks down, saying he thought she was dead. He explains that Ida was one of the many escorts involved in the Lupino case. These women worked with gangsters to gather information and took it to the police. When the cops were about to catch Lupino, they were forced to close the case. Ida had been furious about this and showed up at James' office to beg him to keep the case open. They ended up getting naughty. Since James is one of the bribed cops, he didn't even try to help her. Soon the other girls were found dead without their tongues. James feels guilty, so he's already called his boss to resign and now gives Myrna his badge. This whole conversation is overheard by Clyde. In the middle of the road, Ida stops the car because Frank isn't breathing right and his bullet wound keeps bleeding. Ida leaves the car around. Frank follows her and tells her they could start a new life together. Ida doesn't feel comfortable with her name and she decides she should only be known as the bride. Frank then tells her he loves her and licks her skin before proposing to her. While Myrna comes closer and Clyde also shows up, Ida turns Frank down, saying she's nobody's bride. Frank starts laughing, only to drop dead when Clyde shoots him in the head. As the cops surround them, Ida screams in grief and shoots randomly before dragging Frank back into the car. She hits another vehicle when she takes off but still manages to drive away. The police cars catch up to her on the road and open fire. Ida keeps driving as fast as possible, only to see another police car coming in the opposite direction. She decides to turn off the lights and drive off the road to hide in the tall grass. Eventually she stops the car and checks on Frank, who is definitely dead. Then she talks to Mary, who congratulates her for becoming the bride. A few hours later, Ida arrives at the institute and asks Cornelia to revive him. Myrna follows Ida's tracks and sneaks into the institute. Cornelia refuses, unaware that outside, the cops capture Clyde while Myrna watches the institute's roof, where electricity is glowing brightly. On the table, Frank and Ida move again to hold hands. Meanwhile, James hands Lupino to the rebel women, who can finally have their revenge.